Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 12 tight end and quarterback rankings for the 2022 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, our primary goal is, of course, talking about our top 16 tight end and quarterback rankings going into Week 12. I'll share with you guys my opinions and the statistics that justify the reasons as to why I want to start these specific players and how I think it's all going to stack up when it's all said and done at the end of Week 12. But before we get into said rankings, we'll, of course, address matchups. When I talk about variables that impact the ranking of a player and their potential for upside success on a given weekly basis, matchups are one of the main variables that impact that. When we're talking about the quarterback position, specifically the 11 other defenders that make it their main job and priority to stop said quarterback, it certainly does pay dividends to go ahead and give a little bit of attention to the matchups on a weekly basis. We'll talk about which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks and tight ends thus far this season on average from week 7 through 11. Of course, focusing on that spectrum of time because it's the most recent data we have in regards to how well these defenses have been playing, specifically up against those positions. Now, before we begin, if you guys have not yet already heard from me, yesterday I posted 2 videos, my running back rankings and wide receiver rankings. Throughout those videos, I did mention that tomorrow morning, Thursday, Thanksgiving, again, happy Thanksgiving for those of you who are not going to be able to join us, but tomorrow morning, I will be live streaming from 7 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time with updated rankings on screen, and of course, answering questions throughout the entire 2.5-hour stream in order to help you guys set your lineups because there are 3 games tomorrow on Thanksgiving. Of course, the rankings then will be adjusted for Sunday morning like we typically do. So again, we're going to have all that kind of content coming in your guys' direction. So if you're interested, be sure to subscribe if you have not yet already. And of course, join us tomorrow morning to get your questions answered. And of course, get your lineup set and ready to go for Thursday. Also, before I forget, speaking of Thursday, for those of you who are interested in playing more than just fantasy football, perhaps playing daily fantasy at your fingertips, be sure to check out PrizePicks. Again, there's a link down in the description. And the main reason I wanted to mention this in regards to Thursday is because PrizePicks currently has a free square entry in regards to Justin Jefferson. As of right now, you can go ahead, sign up via PrizePicks, use promo code Andrew to make that first-time deposit. And when you make that first-time deposit using promo code Andrew, it's immediately doubling your first-time deposit up to $100. So you can go ahead and start an entry with Justin Jefferson going more than 0.5 receiving yards. Again, the entire point of PrizePicks is to pick more or less on a given player's statistics. And just like in fantasy football, predicting the potential success or failures of a given player. We'll talk about some more potential plays tomorrow during the live stream. I'll have a couple graphics available for you guys. But as of right now, you can go ahead, put together some entries regarding Justin Jefferson with other players on the Thursday night game. Potentially find some success there, obviously giving you a free square. And even if you don't have anybody playing in tomorrow's games, you have something to look forward to. Thank you very much. Check out the link in the description. Let's move on. Let's talk about matchups. Beginning with Week 12 tight ends. Again, we're immediately going to hop into this, shall we? Beginning with how many points defenses have been giving up to opposing tight ends in a half PPR scoring format. Again, I want to meet everyone in the middle. I don't want to isolate anybody. Whether it's standard or full PPR, we meet them all in the middle with a half PPR. As you can see, of course, the Arizona Cardinals are giving up the most points to opposing tight ends thus far this season on average from week 7 through 11. Now, this has been the case for the entirety of the season, but even when you isolate the last 5 weeks and the last couple games that they have played, they have certainly been, having, quite a bit of struggles in terms of stopping tight ends. Most recently, Monday night, George Kittle with a massive 2-touchdown game, 84 yards on just a couple receptions. We've seen many of those performances all season long, and they're not going to stop anytime soon. So you want to go ahead and take advantage of said matchup. Perhaps Gerald Everett, if healthy, could be a fantastic play there. But either way, on the other end of the spectrum, we're talking about the Atlanta Falcons, the Cleveland Browns, the Philadelphia Eagles, Cincinnati Bengals, teams that have been able to stop opposing tight ends. But in some of these scenarios, they have played matchups in which they don't play a team with the tight end. For example, let's talk about the Atlanta Falcons. Even though they sit at number 32, in the last 5 weeks, they have played the Carolina Panthers twice. The Carolina Panthers do not have a primary receiving tight end that is on a weekly basis getting themselves 5 or more targets. Tommy Tremble is not getting involved that much. So therefore, this kind of gives you a little bit of a different depiction as to what we can actually anticipate. I truly do believe there is a chance that Logan Thomas could have himself a great game up against the Atlanta Falcons, but the statistics as of this moment don't really convey it as such. Either way, we'll go ahead and refer back to these statistics as we progress throughout today's video, but just wanted to show you that. Let's go ahead and let's talk about our top 16 tight end rankings, beginning with our number 1, Travis Kelce. These are going to be short and sweet because you already know you're starting your stud tight ends. Travis Kelce is ridiculous. The pace that he is on is unbelievable. He might break the record for most fantasy points by a tight end in a given year. I wanted to go ahead and mention this before we move on. Thus far this season, Travis Kelce, of course, is the number 1 tight end. The number 2 is Mark Andrews in terms of overall half PPR fantasy points. The difference between their 2 score lines this season is a total of 78.7 fantasy points. So that's the gap between the number 1 and the number 2 tight end. Now, that is the identical gap to the difference between Mark Andrews, the number 2 tight end, and the number 38 tight end, Darren Waller, who only has 31 fantasy points this season. there is a massive chasm of a difference between Travis Kelce and the rest of this group. Honestly, I should have put him in a page by himself. Obviously, you're starting him. An absolute stud play every single week. Speaking of Mark Andrews, yes, even though he is the current tight end 2 for fantasy points total, he is still going to be a fantastic option every single week. Even though last week's performance of 9.3 fantasy points was relatively underwhelming, we're in a position where he plays against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have given up most recently to Travis Kelce 6 catches for 81 yards and a touchdown, 17.1 fantasy points. And not only did Travis Kelce as the tight end in that matchup succeed against Jacksonville, but so did the backup tight end. As a whole, the Kansas City tight ends had 9 catches, 107 and 2 touchdowns against Jacksonville. So why not Mark Andrews? Absolutely lining him up and finding success with Lamar Jackson this week. Moving on to George Kittle. George Kittle, of course, coming off a massive performance of 4 catches, 84 yards, 2 touchdowns. Of course, his 2 touchdowns were not because he was just getting plain targets. It was because he was able to make plays after the catch. That is exactly what this offense is predicated on, getting the ball into your playmakers' hands and allowing them to deliver and find the end zone. And that's exactly what they did against the Arizona Cardinals defense. Now, going into this week, of course, they take on the New Orleans Saints. It is a tough matchup. That is a given. We still saw Tyler Higbee find success with Matthew Stafford prior to him leaving that game. If there's going to be a concerted effort of Jimmy Garoppolo continuing to use George Kittle as a main receiving option, you got to remember, this is a guy that scored 4 touchdowns in the last 4 games he has played. Fantastic option once again this week. Moving on to Dalton Schultz. Now, unfortunately, the 40-3 scoreline against the Minnesota Vikings certainly did play a factor. Of course, they mounted a very early lead. They kicked some massive 60-yard field goals, and then they ran the ball for the entirety of the second half. To be exact, the first team offense for the Dallas Cowboys quite literally only threw the ball 8 times in the second half with Dak Prescott. So as soon as Dak Prescott and the starting offense was pretty much shipped out, they got the backups in. The fantasy value and or upside for the receiving threats of the Dallas Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb, of course, Dalton Schultz, Michael Gallup, they diminished. Going into this week against the New York Giants, the hope is that this isn't going to be one of those one-sided affairs and it be a little bit more of a competitive matchup. If so, Dalton Schultz have certainly a lot of upside. Moving on, talk about TJ Hockenson. Since joining the Minnesota Vikings, his target counts have been 9, 10, and 9. 28 total targets. It is an unbelievable number. And even though his average depth of target is relatively close to the line of scrimmage, in a full PPR scoring format, he is absolutely dominating in terms of the tight end position since being traded. And we know that he has a lot of upside and he can absolutely be a dynamic player down in the red zone. It's only a matter of time until this team uses him more and more down in the red zone, gets him more opportunities in those situations instead of the 4 to 5 yard catches that he's making. Either way, the volume of opportunity that he is being granted every single week separates him from the rest of the pack, maintaining his current value as the number 5 this week. Moving on to our number 6, we have Pat Freiermuth. Speaking of getting a lot of targets, coming off of a week in which he had 12 targets, 8 catches, 79 yards. We talked about it last week. Pat Freiermuth taking on the Cincinnati Bengals is an automatic fantastic play because he has continued to dominate against that defense. They make it a concerted effort and a game plan to utilize Pat Freiermuth in that capacity. Now, the question is, are they going to do the same going up against the Indianapolis Colts this week? I think it doesn't really have to do with matchup in the case of Pat Freiermuth, rather than the offense and the offensive coordinator, Matt Canada, making it a concerted effort to utilize him every single week since coming back from his injury. Since coming back, he's been averaging 9 targets, 6 catches, 62 yards, and 9.18 fantasy points per game. Fantastic play once again. Moving on to Dawson Knox. Dawson Knox is today's thumbnail for a main reason. I mean, in the last 2 weeks, he has had himself 13 targets, 11 catches, 127 receiving yards, and yet hasn't found the end zone, but has still gotten himself 18.2 half PPR fantasy points in those 2 contests. Of course, coming off of a performance in which he had 7 targets, 7 catches, and 70 yards. And now he takes on the Detroit Lions, who are giving up some of the most points to opposing tight ends over the course of the last 5 weeks. Specifically, Cole Kmet, 4 catches, 74 and 2 touchdowns. Mike Gesicki also found the end zone, 3 catches, 38 and a touchdown. And the Green Bay Packers tight ends as an entire group caught the ball 9 times for 89 yards against the Detroit Lions as of late. A lot of upside upcoming here. I think Dawson Knox could very easily find the end zone and be a fantastic play for Week 12. All right, let's move on to our number 8, Juwan Johnson. I think I'm going to jinx it. I think I truly am. Juwan Johnson has scored 5 touchdowns in the last 5 games. And I was completely off of him last week because, again, touchdowns are extremely difficult to predict. But the amount of utilization he is getting down in the red zone is undeniable. And I'm hoping that he's going to be able to maintain a level of success that finds him in the end zone once again, but it's not a guarantee. And that is the risk we have to take every single week with tight ends that are so touchdown dependent. Because if he doesn't end up scoring a touchdown, maybe he gets himself 3 catches for 30 yards. And in a half PPR scoring format, that isn't going to be a world beater. So the biggest issue that I have is that the fact that they take on the San Francisco 49ers defense. Over the course of this season already, there have only been 2 good tight end performances against this defense. One, Tyler Higbee, 10 catches, 73. And the other, Travis Kelce, 6 catches for 98. Every other tight end performance this season against this defense has not been able to surpass 24 or more receiving yards. We better hope Juwan Johnson finds the end zone once again. Moving on to Gerald Everett, our number 9. We talk about Gerald Everett, even though he is coming off of a groin injury. The hope is that he's going to maintain a steady health and practice throughout the entirety of this week, because without Mike Williams there is still more and more opportunity available technically for Gerald Everett to be a primary option in this offense. And the fact that they take on the Arizona Cardinals, giving up 17.76 fantasy points per game, just mentioning some of the recent performances Arizona has given up to opposing tight ends. Kittle, 4 catches, 84, 2 touchdowns. Higbee, 8 catches, 73. Fant, 5 catches, 96. And Taysom Hill and Juwan Johnson combined for 6 catches, 35, and 3 touchdowns. There is so much upside within this play. Hopefully Gerald Everett's healthy and ready to go. Moving on to Cole Kmet. The primary reason I have Cole Kmet sitting at number 10 is because I'm not 100% certain as to whether or not we are going to see Trevor Siemian or Justin Fields under center. We'll talk about Justin Fields on the quarterback section just to give you guys a little bit of a glimpse as to my expectation of whether or not he's going to even play. But at this current moment in time, I think even with Trevor Siemian under center taking on the New York Jets, I think there's still going to be a steady volume of targets going in the direction of Cole Kmet. I cannot guarantee that he's going to score a touchdown. In fact, he probably will not, but he will probably get himself enough targets and utilization as a receiver, just yardage and receptions alone, to be a relevant top 10 option within the given week. Moving on to David Njoku. David Njoku last week only played 37% of the offensive snaps, and Harrison Bryant instead was the primary tight end option that even scored a touchdown in that game. That all being said, it was mainly because David Njoku is still working through coming back from his injury. In fact, didn't even practice earlier today. There may be a good chance that David Njoku does not participate and doesn't even play this week. If in fact that's the case, of course, we're not starting him up and we're going to be safe in that regard. There may even be a conversation to be had in regards to not even playing him at all, just to be safe. But you got to remember, they do take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Just to give you some perspective, since week 7, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have given up 6 catches, 69 to Seattle, 10 catches, 114 and a touchdown to Baltimore, and 2 catches for 32 and a touchdown to Carolina tight ends. There's been a lot of production against Tampa Bay as of late. David Njoku could definitely, strike gold if he's healthy and ready to go. Moving on to our number 12, we have Foster Moreau. We talked about this as of the Waiver Wire Monday video. Foster Moreau is in the top 10 of all 4 primary categories of the tight end position since we have seen Darren Waller exit this team a couple weeks ago to the injured reserve. In terms of top 10 targets, receptions, and receiving yards, those are great numbers. So he's going to continue to maintain in this conversation, and he takes on the Seattle Seahawks, who earlier this season have given up a boatload of points. But the reason why, in terms of matchups, they haven't been showing that they've been giving up a lot of points is because the matchup that they've specifically had against teams that don't utilize the tight end position. In specific, they've given up 2 massive games to Zach Ertz this season. 5 catches, 40 and a touchdown, 7 catches for 70. Everett, 5 catches for 63. Trotman scored a touchdown against them. TJ Hockenson had that massive 180 yards, 8 catch, 2 touchdown game. There's a lot of potential. And I think Foster Moreau could end up finding a lot of success here in an offense that certainly needs playmakers to step up. Moving on to Austin Hooper, on number 13. Austin Hooper, purely based on the volume of opportunity he has gathered in the last 2 weeks and the fact that this offense is trending forward and in a positive direction with Ryan Tannehill back, I truly do believe he can absolutely be a red zone option that complements Derrick Henry. When Derrick Henry is forcing so many defenders in the box, the play action game opens up that much easier. And, potentially Austin Hooper can find himself scoring a touchdown again. Again, this last week, scored 2 touchdowns on 4 receptions. Now, this week, the Tennessee Titans, they do take on the Cincinnati Bengals. That is an advantageous matchup. The Pittsburgh Steelers earlier this year, and most recently this last week, found a lot of success in the 2 games that the Pittsburgh Steelers took on the Cincinnati Bengals. 7 catches for 115, 10 catches for 87. There's a lot of potential to be had here. Even Baltimore, another division rival against Cincinnati, 10 catches, 96 and a touchdown. There's a lot of potential here. Hopefully, Austin Hooper can step up to the task at hand. Moving on to Mike Gesicki, another one of these tight ends that should have themselves a pretty good week. The Houston Texans defense are giving up a pretty fair amount of points to opposing tight ends. Most recently, Freiermuth, 8 catches, 75. Hockenson, 3 catches, 80. Kmet, 5 catches, 41, 2 touchdowns. Harrison Bryant, 3 catches, 15 and a touchdown. There is potential to be had in this given matchup. Mike Gesicki, yes, isn't given as much utilization as guys like Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle or even Trent Sherfield or even Jeff Wilson or Raheem Mostert. He probably won't, but maybe a sneaky tight end touchdown could be upon us in week 12. Moving on to number 15, we have Evan Engram. Evan Engram taking on the Baltimore Ravens is not an easy matchup, but the fact of the matter is he continues to get pretty safe amount of utilization within this offense. And the Baltimore Ravens at times, specifically Patrick Queen, has struggled in terms of coverage. If we're going to continue to see this kind of utilization in one-on-one matchup, there could be a fantastic play in the cards here for us with Evan Engram as our number 15. Moving on to the final option is Greg Dulcich. Russell Wilson, even though he was accurate in terms of his overall opportunities passing last week, he wasn't able to find much value for his receiving options. The only relevant fantasy option within that offense was, quite frankly, Latavius Murray, because he fell into the end zone for one of the only touchdowns in that given game. If in fact Greg Dulcich continues to gather, more and more targets every single week, we could feel a little bit more confident about playing him. I think the matchup against Carolina is good enough to where he could succeed. It's just really sketchy to play anybody associated with Russell Wilson expecting touchdown upside. All right, let's move on. Let's begin talking about quarterbacks in terms of how many points defenses have been giving up on a per week average since week 7 in a 4-point per passing touchdown format in terms of passing statistics alone. We do not want to talk about rushing statistics, because whether or not Jalen Hurts ran for 80 plus yards against the Indianapolis Colts doesn't give another immobile quarterback more potential in that factor. So when we're just talking about passing yardage, passing touchdowns, and passing interceptions, we have the following statistics as the Pittsburgh Steelers, Arizona Cardinals, and Jacksonville Jaguars are giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks as of late since week 7. Of course, we want to take advantage of said matchups, while on the other end of the spectrum, we have the New England Patriots as the best defense as such, of course, causing a lot of turnovers, and not only that, not really giving up many points to opposing quarterbacks. And we have Kirk Cousins in prime time against the New England Patriots. It's going to be a tough matchup for them. I don't even have Kirk Cousins ranked in today's video for a reason. Keep that in mind for those of you who have him on roster and have been depending on his overall production on a weekly basis. I'm sure you have a sour taste in your mouth from the terrible performance he put forth last week. I'd look to pivot to potentially some of these options that we'll have on screen. So let's get into it, shall we? Talking about our top 16 quarterbacks for week 12. Beginning with our number 1, we have Patrick Mahomes. Again, Patrick Mahomes is an automatic play. We know this. It is a given. Just in the same way that we obviously automatically start Travis Kelce, these guys are just irreplaceable. Currently the number 1 overall quarterback in fantasy football, Patrick Mahomes is coming off another incredible week of 300 plus passing or 3 passing touchdowns. Yes, all of them going in the direction of Kelce, but it doesn't matter what you surround Patrick Mahomes with. Whether it's Juju, McCole Hardman, Kadarius Toney out, Justin Watson, Sky Moore will step up. And luckily for Patrick Mahomes this week, regardless of who's available at wide receiver, he takes on the Los Angeles Rams defense. One of the best matchups, and we already have information that Matthew Stafford is not going to play this week. So the defense for the Kansas City Chiefs is a fantastic play, but not only is that defense going to score fantasy points, it's going to get back the possession to Patrick Mahomes, whether it's on a short field, whether it's punts, it doesn't matter. The more possessions Patrick Mahomes has, specifically against the defense that has been, hurting a lot as of late, there's even more upside for fantasy points. He's a fantastic number 1. Moving on to our number 2, we have Josh Allen. Even though Josh Allen had a very underwhelming performance, 3 rushes for only 7 yards this last week against Cleveland. That is extremely rough, especially considering we want him to be the number 1 option every given week. He has been struggling as of late, whether it's the elbow, whether it's the interceptions that he's throwing, or whether it's just defenses, being able to key in on what exactly this team wants to accomplish every week. Either way, I'm looking at this matchup and thinking to myself, in the last 2 games, the Detroit Lions have had to take on Daniel Jones and Justin Fields, and they have not been able to contain either of those guys in the rushing category. If, in fact, Josh Allen can have himself, a little bit more upside and get more rushing attempts, and they're not handing off the ball to Devin Singletary down in the red zone, he could very easily go for the number 1 overall quarterback within the given week. But until then, I think he's just going to have to air it out. Against this secondary that is dealing with a lot of injuries with Gabriel Davis and Stephon Diggs, Dawson Knox primarily, of course, another one of these touchdown upside players. I think he's a fantastic play based on the matchup against Detroit. Moving on to Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts had himself a week in which he had 16 rushing attempts for 86 yards and a rushing touchdown. Of course, when you are in scramble mode and you're trying to come back and beat a team like the Indianapolis Colts after taking a massive deficit early on, Jalen Hurts had to take the team and had to put them on his back. And that's exactly what he did. He literally carried them into the end zone for the final play that scored, got them, the 1-point lead at the end of the game. Fantastic. Without Dallas Goedert in the lineup, it certainly does decrease the potential of passing yardage from a guy like Jalen Hurts, because, relying upon Jack Stoll to make himself a primary option isn't something that we can purely anticipate. So if, in fact, this leads to more rushing from Jalen Hurts, even better. Takes on Green Bay. We just saw Ryan Tannehill torch this defense for 2 passing touchdowns and 330 passing yards, even while Derrick Henry threw a touchdown against that defense. Jalen Hurts a perfect option. Moving on to our number 4, we have Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow said that he expects that Ja'Marr Chase is going to play this week. Again, somebody asked me in the comment section last night, and I responded to them saying that if, in fact, Ja'Marr Chase does play, I have to play him. He's in my starting lineup. He's in my top 12. Where does that move T. Higgins? He probably still maintains as a top 12 option, because the primary way to beat the Tennessee Titans defense is to throw the ball, purely. You cannot run the ball on them. They're only giving up a 2.81 yard per carry average to opposing running backs this season. So unless somebody else is running the ball, like a quarterback or a wide receiver, it seems to me that the Cincinnati Bengals have only one choice, and that's to light them up through the air. And getting Ja'Marr Chase back absolutely elevates the play of Joe Burrow, coming off of another fantastic week, 350 plus passing yards and 4 passing touchdowns. Hopefully he'll continue that streak in this week's contest. Moving on, let's talk about Tua. Tua has had himself obviously a bye week this last week, but prior to that, 3 consecutive games of 3 or more passing touchdowns. That is an unbelievable streak of games. Throughout those 3 games, he's been able to maintain a 70+% passing completion percentage in each of those contests. The level of production that he is seeing over the course of the last month is unbelievable. And like I talked about yesterday in regards to the 2 wide receivers that of course help accompany his production, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, they're the exception to the rule, especially when we're talking about a matchup against the Houston Texans, who quite frankly haven't really been giving up many points to opposing wide receivers or quarterbacks as of late. That all being said, the primary reason why Tua has been able to light it up is because those games in the last 3 contests that he has played have been relatively competitive. The opposing offenses have scored. If in fact Houston isn't able to score in this contest, which many of us are expecting that they probably won't as we're starting Miami's defense, there may be a chance where his upside is a little bit capped. And with that, we have him at number 5. Moving on to our number 6, we have Justin Herbert. When you get more pieces back, Justin Herbert begins to trend back to his 2021-2020 self, where he is a consistent fantasy option. 280 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, got himself a little bit of utilization on the ground. But ultimately, the more opportunity this man continues to get with weapons like Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Gerald Everett, guys that as of late have not been healthy but could potentially be ready for him this week, this could be an absolute fantastic blow-up performance. We just saw Jimmy Garoppolo slaughter this defense for 4 passing touchdowns. Obviously, a lot of that production done after the catch from his receivers, but hey, why not the Los Angeles Chargers receivers, specifically guys like Austin Eckler, of course, helping him out every single given week. Last week, Austin Eckler only had 2 catches. If you go ahead and, of course, accelerate that number, there's even more yardage available for a guy like Justin Herbert in this given week. Moving on, let's talk about Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has been underwhelming. It is a given, but he does take on Jacksonville. The Jacksonville Jaguars matchup, whether it's for the tight end position or out wide, is extremely advantageous. Even in the running game, it has been an advantageous matchup. So hopefully, Lamar Jackson will continue to get himself more utilization on the ground, coming off of a week of 11 rushing attempts and 31 rushing yards and a touchdown. Again, we need to see more of that utilization on the ground, because if he's not able to, his overall upside is capped, even if it's a fantastic matchup. Moving on to Dak Prescott, our number 8. Dak Prescott has had himself 2 or more touchdowns in the last 3 consecutive games that he has played. Now, this upcoming week, they take on the Giants, and hopefully it's not going to be a one-sided affair in which it's a complete blowout and they have to, pull Dak Prescott in the 4th quarter, pretty much siphoning some of his potential upside value. But he still was incredible last week, having himself 20-plus fantasy points in a standard 4-point per passing touchdown format. And now he takes on the New York Giants, who will be without Adoree Jackson, their primary number 1 cornerback. That only helps the potential of CeeDee Lamb, the receiving threats to this offense, and the potential, of course, Dak Prescott. Moving on to Geno Smith, our number 9. Geno Smith has been one of the most consistent quarterbacks in fantasy. Do not let it fool you. In the last 4 consecutive games, he has thrown for 2 or more passing touchdowns. In the last 3 consecutive games, he has had more than 20 rushing yards. That level of production is unbelievable. And when you take into account the fact that the Las Vegas Raiders this season have given up 2 or more touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks in 8 of their last 10 games, this makes it an automatic play for Geno Smith, coming off the bye week healthy, ready to go, and of course dominating up against one of the worst defenses in the National Football League. Moving on to number 10, we have Jimmy Garoppolo, of course coming off a fantastic performance in which all of his receiving threats got the job done. Now, the 2 touchdowns to Brandon Ayuk were automatic in the end zone. Well done, Jimmy Garoppolo, will take those. But the one that the 2 to George Kittle, where George Kittle made plays after the catch and was a dominant force, that is amazing. We love to see that. Jimmy Garoppolo has had 6 consecutive games of 15 or more fantasy points this season. And not only that, the fact that they've added Christian McCaffrey to this offense increases his weekly production because of that checkdown. Instead of having to look for his safety blanket in a Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, all he has to do is look 4 yards to his left, dump off a pass, and know that Christian McCaffrey, 4 yards in the backfield, is going to get an additional 6 yards on top of it, go for a 10-yard reception, and make it a big play. When you're able to go ahead and trickle in receptions here or there to Christian McCaffrey, the baseline production of Jimmy Garoppolo extends itself into a fantastic top 10 potential option. Moving on to our number 11, we have Tom Brady. Tom Brady, prior to his bye week, had himself a pretty good performance up against the Seattle Seahawks, and hopefully they're back on track, and hopefully this offensive line is ready to go, because if they are, this should be a fantastic matchup going up against the Cleveland Browns. I know that there is going to be a lot of, conversation whether or not Myles Garrett's going to get after him and whether or not this offensive line is going to be able to hold up. I think they'll be able to do so. And when they're able to, and you give Tom Brady time, and the running game is beginning to work, just like it did last game against the Seattle Seahawks, when the running game is active and you're able to get yardage on a downly basis, it opens up so much more for Tom Brady in this offense. That's exactly how he functioned throughout his entire career in New England. And of course, his first 2 seasons here, whether it was with Ronald Jones or Leonard Fournette. When the running game is working, Tom Brady is that much more efficient and that much more deadly as a quarterback option. Moving on to Justin Fields at number 12. For those of you who have been wondering, where is Justin Fields in the rankings? I currently have him at number 12 because I'm not 100% certain, considering it's Wednesday, as to whether or not he's even going to play. From what we have heard, instead of it being a dislocated shoulder, originally reported by Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network, it is now something of an AC joint, tear, sprain, something of that extent. Now, that is mainly described to me as a pain management situation. If Justin Fields can fight through it, then he'll be able to play. But if not, and it's more of a severe AC joint shoulder injury, then he may be out for a couple weeks. And if that's going to be the case, it would not surprise me. Again, if he's available, I want to play him because of the rushing upside. Again, this last weekend, 85 rushing yards on 18 rushing attempts and a rushing touchdown. Might as well be a running back considering those yardage and the averages that he's been putting up. But as of right now, if he's healthy, I want to play him. If he's not, then we'll pivot. Moving on to our number 13, we have Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones has been a pretty good quarterback as of late. And the primary reason is because, of course, he always has the potential of rushing yardage and a rushing touchdown. He was able to get himself 7 rushes for 50 yards and a rushing touchdown this last weekend with 341 passing yards and a passing touchdown. That level of upside is certainly going to be there, especially in games in which they're trying to crawl back from a deficit. I think there's a very good chance that they do exactly that tomorrow against the Dallas Cowboys defense. And while he's crawling back, even though he will not have Wan'Dale Robinson as an available option, hopefully we'll see the other wide receivers for the New York Giants step up, as we'll certainly need them to do so for Daniel Jones' overall fantasy upside. Moving on, let's talk about Derek Carr. Derek Carr has been extremely consistent over the course of the last 3 weeks here. 3 consecutive games of 2 or more passing touchdowns. We love to see it. Now, obviously, all those passing touchdowns are going in the direction, or predominantly in the direction of Davante Adams. As long as Davante Adams is on the field, I'm expecting another one of these weeks of 2 touchdowns going in the direction of some receiving options within this offense, because you got to remember, in the last 3 consecutive games, Davante Adams has had himself alone 120 receiving yards each of those last 3 games. So we should probably see half of his production, Derek Carr specifically, go in the direction of Davante Adams, and then the rest is just fantastic upside with the other potential options, Matt Collins, Foster Moreau, and the occasional Josh Jacobs will route on the sideline that goes for 41 yards, which was absolutely insane this last week. Moving on to Marcus Mariota. I truly do believe that the fact that they will not be able to run the ball effectively will open up this passing game, and Marcus Mariota will be running the ball even more. He had himself 13 rushing attempts this last week. In terms of scrambles, he's going to have to step up even further, taking on the Washington Commanders, because this is a pretty good D-line. They get Chase Young back, they're going to get after him. But either way, I truly do believe that Marcus Mariota has a lot of value going up against the secondary, considering the running game may be completely shut down, which will, of course, force Marcus Mariota to sling the rock. Moving on to the final option, it is Kyler Murray. I have no clue whether he's going to play. They have a bye week next week. They have no incentive to actually play him. They are not even in a playoff hunt. If, in fact, he does play, it is purely going to be dependent on whether or not we have Rondale Moore, DeAndre Hopkins, Marquise Hollywood-Brown ready to go. Because if they're not ready, we have no Zach Ertz as well. If D-Hop's the only receiver out there and they're taking on the Los Angeles Chargers, yes, D-Hop's going to be able to be perfectly fine for his fantasy value, but I'm not 100% certain as to whether or not Kyler will be as well. And that is why I have him currently at number 16, because again, it's a coin toss as to whether or not we get the good Kyler or the one that is throwing interceptions and is getting pulled because of the injury re-aggravating itself within the given game. Again, a lot of risk, not so much reward. Okay, that's going to cover it for me today. Thank you everybody for watching. Don't forget, tomorrow morning from 7 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, I will be live streaming here on the channel with updated rankings, answering questions for those 2.5 hours in order to help you set your lineups. Outside of that, do not forget, check out PrizePicks. If you guys haven't yet already, be sure to make an entry with Justin Jefferson going more than 0.5 receiving yards. Go ahead and check out the link down in the description and use promo code Andrew, because once you use that promo code and make your first time deposit is immediately doubled up to $100. Check that out today. Thank you everybody for watching, and until tomorrow, of course, the live stream, I'll see you guys. Peace.